Welcome, everyone. He did ask me about the handsome thing. I told him, don't destroy your credibility, okay? And I told him that most people introduce me that I am the husband of Kelly Craft, so I apologize that she's not here. She would love to be here. Normally, I get introduced in Texas as the coal guy, and that comes from George W. Bush. When I went to a fundraiser for his re-election for a second term, and he looked at me and said, "Oh, you're the coal guy." And he says, you might want to think about doing something else. These environmentalists don't like you. He said, why don't you think about switchgrass? And I'm glad I didn't take that advice. Instead, I did think about it and started diversifying a little bit. So we are in the oil and gas business in the sense that we own minerals in Texas and the Permian, as well as Anadarko and the Williston Basin, a little bit up in Pennsylvania. So we are involved in the energy business. I've been in it basically all my life. I was a product of the first energy crisis. I was born and raised in eastern Kentucky. Lyndon Johnson came to a nearby county and declared the war on poverty in 1964. So I graduated from high school in '68. It was still a very depressed area. I went to school to be an accountant, and then I went to school in law school to be a tax partner in a CPA firm. And while I was in law school, the energy crisis occurred. And then at that moment in time, the country decided we better reach out to our nation and come back to coal. So there was a company out of Houston, Texas called Falcon Seaboard. Maybe some of you guys know Ted Law. He made an investment in Hazard, Kentucky, and I was invited to join their company to help build that company to sell it. What I learned from that experience was a fellow by the name of J.L. Jackson. I don't know if anybody knows J.L. He lives in Dallas. He worked for Diamond Shamrock for a while because Diamond Shamrock ended up buying the company that he built to sell. He told me at the time that I'm not offering you a career, I'm just offering you the opportunity to develop skills. And what I really learned out of that, not only did I get some skills, but I also learned the benefit of employers in creating jobs. I saw the ability with jobs, what it did for poverty in our area in just 2 years was significantly more than the 10 years before that, with all the hundreds of millions of dollars that were being spent to try to lift our community from poverty. I was always told by people that would come from the government that we needed to be dependent on the government. Bobby Kennedy came and said, I'm sorry that you got such a dire situation, but we're here to help you and we're not going to let you down. I was fortunate to have mentors in my life that said, don't listen to that. You need to be self-reliant, you need to work hard, and you need to fulfill your purpose as to why you're on this earth. And I think that's what drew me when I got a call to see if I would join this organization or to contribute this organization. And I got to read your mission statement, and I could see that my values and your values overlap, to a T. Freedom, individual responsibility, and free enterprise. Those three things go hand in hand. And I've only been a member for I keep saying member, I guess it's really just a contributor, because I don't do anything except contribute and get the benefit of your all's leadership and your all's policy. And I'm so happy that you get to share all of the great work that you're doing for your state with us and the rest of this country, because we all know the importance of energy to the United States and to the economy. One of the leaders of NERC, which is responsible for assuring that we have energy reliability in the electricity grid, recently said that when you look at electricity, it's only about 7% of the GDP of our country, but it happens to be the first 7% of GDP in our country. Without electricity, without low-cost energy, we would not have the great country we have today. We know that's why we're we are the richest nation in the world, and why we have freedom that we can share with all the freedom-seeking countries that I got the benefit to watch and see my wife serve in the United Nations. It's so sad having experienced the energy crisis of the 70s and see all the remnants that go with that, with high inflation, high interest rates, and all the pain and agony, that we're revisiting that today because of self-inflicted government policies. There's no question in my mind this energy crisis was caused by the climate change policies of both Europe and the United States starting under the Obama administration and reinforced under Biden's administration. It is caused by a shortage of energy. Why is that shortage? Yes, we had disruption with COVID, but more importantly, it was very difficult to get back in business when demand returned because the banks weren't there. They weren't there to lend to the fossil fuel industry. There were employees didn't want to come back because they heard the rhetoric that was coming from the Democratic Party that we had no future. And as a result, it was very difficult to think in terms of making future investments to get back to the position we were before. So I personally attribute our energy crisis to the Biden administration. I think that what I lived through in the energy crisis of the 75 time period, we had Jimmy Carter be the first one to say that our country needs to have as a primary goal to depend on energy or to focus and achieve energy independence. Every president since Jimmy Carter made that same appeal. It wasn't until Donald Trump became president that we actually achieved that goal and that objective. That was achieved partially on the back of innovation and the fracking movement, but also because of his policies, where he put energy independence as a specific goal. He was focused on the workers, and he understood the benefit of low-cost energy, and we achieved that objective. It wasn't one day until after Biden got elected that he decided to reverse so many of the Trump policies that allowed us to have this energy independence. Then we go just 1 year, it just took 1 year to have these climate policies impact the reinvestment of fossil fuels that did not occur to create this shortage. We had shortages around the world also because of the policies in Europe. You had before Russia invaded Ukraine, you had the situation where the wind speed in Europe was about a third of what they expected. That's what started the decline. Then you combine that with Germany, and primarily, but the rest of Europe also making a miscalculation that they could trust Russia in supplying their energy security through their gas pipeline. So we now know that we're right in the middle of an energy crisis. We're also in the midst of inflation, the highest we've had in 40 years. I think half of that is because obviously we've been printing money like it's going out of style. The other half is because of the high cost of energy. So what are we going to do about it? You know, you had Joe Biden primarily talking about, well, let's pass a climate bill. That'll solve the problem. That really was only trying to solve a problem because he saw Glenn Youngkin win in Virginia and he started worrying about the election and feeling that the reason they lost in Virginia was because there wasn't some bold policy coming out of Congress. So he put the pressure on Joe Manchin to say we need to have a climate bill. Joe Manchin said no, too much inflation. You're asking for way too much money. You've already got several $1 trillion. That's enough. We're going to have inflation. Months go by, months go by, months go by. Then the CHIPS Act, we got the CHIPS Act. So I was in an industry meeting in West Virginia, and Joe Manchin was there, and he asked for a private meeting and said he needed help on the CHIPS Act because McConnell was trying to suggest that you guys got to give up this climate bill. No, we're not going to have that because of inflation. So we get the CHIPS Act passed, and guess what happens? We didn't get a climate bill, we got an Inflation Reduction Act because that was Joe Manchin's major issue. Some people don't really believe it's an Inflation Reduction Act. Our friend Alex Epstein calls it an Inflation Act. He says it's a challenge, it's a recipe, a four-step recipe to destroy American energy. He says, one, the act makes us more dependent on unreliable energy and closing reliable energy. It makes us more dependent on China. 2, it imposed gas taxes during an energy crisis. 3, it gave EPA more power to restrict fossil fuels. And 4th, it gave the environmental community and EPA activists the opportunity to have a bully pulpit to try to, again, continue to demean our industry and what we do. I encourage you, I'm sure there's a lot of Alex Epstein fans, but I encourage you to read his information. He's got great articles this month on his podcast or his webpage of energytalkingpoints.com to get more details. I want to thank this organization for their leadership on an effort on the ESG movement and ESG litigation. I can tell you it has made a difference in the state of Oklahoma and the state of Kentucky. We're in the process of negotiating our credit agreement, and we have seen 2 banks basically say they're staying primarily because our credit's great, but also because of this ESG the legislation that was passed. We've had several banks, including J.P. Morgan, that's gave me lip service, but they're not showing up. They had the agreement to manage the pension fund for the state of Kentucky. They'll have it no longer. The banks that have supported me and our company are both vying to take over that leadership position. So I want to thank the board. I want to thank the leadership of this foundation for not just bending to discrimination against oil and gas, but also discrimination against fossil fuels. By you being committed to fossil fuels made a huge difference in our future and the men and women that provide low-cost energy and energy security for our country. I want to thank you for that. So let me just wrap up here, and I want to give you 6 ideas of where I think we are on energy policy and some of the challenges and some of the realities and what we need to do to try to help educate Americans and help educate policymakers what you guys are really good at so that we can in fact enjoy the freedom that we have, because we have been able to be a low-cost energy provider, and we were successful in getting back to energy dominance. We do have the reserves, we do have the technology, we do have the knowledge that we can recapture that if we have focus in getting the right people elected and focusing on the policy needs and telling the truth. That's one of your objectives, is to tell truth in energy. One of those truths gets right back to what I said. Here we are, we've got an energy crisis, and it's really because of lack of supply. I was disheartened by a Wall Street Journal article last week where it was talking about the significant increase in utility rates, and it directly took some of the talking points from the Biden administration, suggesting that we have an energy crisis because of geopolitical issues or because of weather impacts around the world and that was impacting energy supply or production, or because of inflation, none of which are true in my opinion. I think it really gets back to the discrimination and the discouragement to fossil fuel producers to produce, whether it be oil, gas, or coal. We need to maintain our existing production. We need to maintain every power plant we have that consumes that energy production, whether it's refineries or power plants. We need to maintain our export to help the rest of the world have low-cost energy with what's going on in Russia. Before the Inflation Act, 20% of coal plants were scheduled to be shut down before 2030. Some in 2023, some in 2025, some in 2028, all because of EPA regulations and the pressure on utility executives for ESG. I'm not sure what's going to happen. There are still pressures to do that. However, we're starting to see utility bills that people have not seen in a long time. Right now, we're in the month of June, utility bills were up like 16%. in in three states in in New England, they're looking at 100% increase in utility bills through January, all because of the energy crisis. I think that pressure is starting to bear on these utility executives to think about what they're going to do. Another reason that they're having to think about it is they can't replace these plants that they close. They're expected to replace the power plants that they want to shut down with renewable energy. If you look at what's going on in the East, we've got about 2% that are solar today. They want to shut down 30% of fossil fuel plants by 2030. It's taken 15 years to get 2%. We've got plants that have been, or solar farms that have been bid into the grid that cannot come online because they can't get enough land, contiguous land, to meet their obligations. Our company is getting all kinds of resumes from solar developers. They're basically saying, I get paid to complete a project. There's no projects getting completed because the pipeline is totally full. And that was before the Inflation Reduction Act that is trying to incentivize all these plants. It's not going to happen. The other problem is you got a grid that you have to invest in. Once you get more than a certain percent of the unreliables and interruptible power, your transmission grids that we have today do not allow functioning. I'm sure that we had a little wind earlier tonight, and that's why the lights were flickering. We also need to define the reality of scale. I think some people look at it and say, well, you know, we can go to 50% or 100%, and it's just not going to happen because you can't get it done fast enough. The materials are all coming from China. They're more expensive. We can't get them in, and then we got to think in terms of all the increase in demand of electricity because of the EVs that they are trying to push through the system by 2030. The last couple of things is we need business leaders and consumers to tell the truth about energy, how it's the lifeblood of their companies, how you have to have low-cost energy to compete in a global economy. And the truth is, CO2 emissions are a global issue. They're not a domestic issue. And whatever we don't produce, China and India will. So I'm of the view that all of this dysfunction of disruption of our energy markets are for naught. If the only reason we're doing it is to try to reduce energy emissions. And finally, we need to elect lawmakers who value low-cost energy. We need to win the midterms, we meaning the Republican Party. I'll be biased. And we also need to win the White House again in 2024. So I titled my presentation tonight that I really miss the leadership that values energy security. Energy security leads to national security. National security leads to freedom. It's worth fighting for. I know this group fights for that. Again, I want to thank you for taking all your great ideas on energy as well as all the issues that you're advocating to make your state the best it can be, and then sharing that to allow the United States to be the best it can be. And thank everybody else for being here tonight to support this cause.